if I did not get to meet you, is Gage Coldwater, and I'm the director of a mission work called the Manna Project. And I'm thankful to be here this morning and be able to tell you about the mission work in which we are engaged. And I hope to get you excited about mission work. A few weeks ago, I was at a place and they said, one of the men said, we don't really like to have mission work pitches on Sunday morning. I'm not a big fan of that mindset of mission work. I think that we ought to be excited about the mission that Jesus gave us. The idea that Jesus portrayed to his disciples was not one of drudgery or difficulty, but something that we can do. Jesus said, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. And that's our job. That includes Tuscaloosa, it includes Vance, it includes every little community around here in which you live, and it includes the rest of the world. And brethren, that is our job, to get the gospel message to every person on earth. I'm reminded of the words of Paul when he said in 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 10 that everyone is going to stand before the judgment seat of Christ and give an account for the things they've done in this body, whether they be good or whether they be evil. And we need to recognize that if every person is going to stand before the judgment seat of Christ, that we need to help them be prepared to stand before that judgment seat. And so that's the essential nature of mission work, is to go into all the world. And so I hope that it is not something, I know sometimes mission presentations can be somewhat somniferous, make you sleepy. I hope not to do that this morning. I hope to get you engaged. I hope to even get you excited about mission work. I want you to think about the responsibility that we have as individuals as we begin. The responsibility that we have as individuals. It's often the case that we think of other people, maybe the preacher, maybe the elders, as being responsible for evangelizing the whole world, right? That's kind of been a mentality that has permeated Christianity as a whole for years. But that's not what the Bible teaches at all. The Bible teaches a very personal responsibility when it comes to teaching the lost. And today I hope to get you to think about how you can get involved personally with mission work. Now I'm going to tell you about our mission work, which is called the Manna Project. And I think by the end of the presentation you'll understand why we call it the Manna Project. But you're probably asking, what exactly is the Manna Project? The Manna Project is a mission work where we are focused, where we are committed to this idea of going around the world and spreading the gospel and utilizing every tool that God has given us. That includes preaching, evangelism, that includes lots of seminars, church growth seminars, preaching schools. We even use agriculture as a method of actually training people in the gospel as well as in self-sustainability. And I'm going to explain a little bit more about that in a minute. And it all started in 2010. I had the opportunity to go to Nepal. If you don't know where Nepal is, go to India. So you go right north of there and you'll find this little sliver of a country that runs right along the Himalayas, sandwiched between what used to be Tibet and what is India. So now Tibet is China. And if you think about Nepal, you probably think about Mount Everest, right? And Nepal is a beautiful country. I had the opportunity to teach in a preaching school while I was there. And I showed up the first Monday morning to teach, and I had 26 students, and they all lined up after the first class to meet me. They wanted to shake my hand, introduce themselves to me, and as they did, every one of them would introduce themselves and then ask me if I could financially support them and their family because, and here's what they would say, our family is back home starving. And my heart bled for them. I wanted to help each of them. But there were 26 of them standing in line. And after the first few came by me, I realized that I could not say yes to any of them, for if I said yes to any of them, I would have to say yes to all of them, because lest I create an environment of some jealousy, somebody being upset, why didn't I support this one while I supported this one? What do I do? And so I just told them, sit down. I said, you guys sit down. I said, I'm going to ask you a question. Are all of you going to ask me for financial support? And they said, yes. I said, is it because all of you have family back home that you say is starving? Yes. And I said, well, why are they starving? Now that might seem like a weird question to you, but to me it wasn't. I wanted to know the reason why. Let me give you a little background. I grew up on a farm in western Oklahoma, very western Oklahoma, and where the dailies are, you go 3.5 hours further west. And we got about 18 inches of rain a year. We had a lot of land and very little money. We were, as the old timers would say, land rich, money poor. And we were money poor. And if we were going to eat where I grew up, we had to grow it. It's plain and simple. And we had to grow it with very limited resources. And so I had 2 older brothers. My dad was a wheat farmer and a cattle rancher. And my job was to go spend my days with my mother and my grandmother gardening. And I would help them garden. I would help them. We had windmills to pump our water. I kept the windmills operating at our gardens. I did all the hoeing. I did all the carrying of hay for mulching. I did a ton of gardening growing up. And then I learned to can and put it all up. And so this was all something very basic to me. And so as they're telling me they're starving, my mind immediately went to, why aren't you growing a garden? I said, do you guys know how to grow a garden? No. I said, what do you mean you don't know how to grow a garden? Gardening to me is elementary. I know some people, they call it a black thumb. I don't know if that actually really exists, but it's pretty simple. Move dirt aside, put seed in the ground, move dirt back over, said seed, water, fertilize, pick, right? It's pretty simple. I said, you guys don't know how to garden? No. I said, how do you not know how to garden? They said, we've never gardened. See, they've lived in these major cities like Kathmandu, others there, and they've never had land to garden on. They don't know how to do it. And I said, well, if you learned to garden, you could feed your family, and you could do it yourself. You wouldn't have to rely on someone else. And they said, well, we don't have anybody to teach us. And that was my light bulb moment. I said, well, what if I was teaching from 8 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon the Bible. I said, what if at 4, when we finished school here, I taught you how to grow a garden, how to raise some chickens, how to raise maybe some rabbits for meat, and then your family wouldn't have to starve. Okay, so we did. Now, Helen understands this, but Nepal is a Hindu country. They honor the cow very highly. And now we honor it, but we like it medium rare, right? Their cows like to lay in the street, not on a table. And the cow will lay in the street, and you'll have a line of cars backed up a mile long waiting on this cow to take its nap because they won't move the cow. Well, with the cows in the street, there's also a lot of cow pies in the street. So I'm trying to teach these guys how to grow a garden, so they need soil, they need fertilizer. They really thought I was crazy because we took one field trip one evening and we took buckets and we walked through the streets of Kathmandu picking up cow manure. Took it back, built giant compost and manure pits, and it went over really well. They learned how to grow a garden, they learned how to raise chickens, and they learned how to raise rabbits for meat, and we got them all started with some rabbits and seeds and some tools to help them. And I came home and I told my wife, I said, man, I wonder how many preachers in the world are starving and their families are struggling just because they don't have this kind of knowledge. And what if we could empower our preachers around the world to be self-sustaining so that they stay in their villages preaching the gospel on their own? There's biblical precedent for this. I want you to go with me to Acts chapter 20. Acts chapter 20. In Acts chapter 20, we know a lot of the verses in Acts chapter 20. You think about the great verse in Acts chapter 20, verse 28 about the elders, how that Paul tells them that the Lord has commanded them that they're supposed to feed the church of God, which he's purchased with his own blood. We know that verse. We know verse 32, where Paul would then, as he is leaving the elders at Ephesus and the church at Ephesus, he says, I now commend you to God and to the word of his grace, which is able to build you up and to give you an inheritance among all of them which are sanctified. And that's kind of where we end in Acts chapter 20 in our knowledge. But I want you to go with me to verse 33. He says, now this is Paul talking. He says, I have coveted no man's gold, silver, or apparel. Yea, you yourselves know that these hands have ministered to my necessities and to them that were with me. And I have showed you all things, how that so laboring you ought now catch this, to support the weak and to remember the words of the Lord Jesus, that it's better or it's more blessed to give than it is to receive. Paul says, you know that these hands have labored to take care of my needs and to those that are with me. Now, you could go back to Acts chapter 18 and you could find another portion of this as well, where Paul would travel to Corinth to work with the church and do mission work in Corinth. And when he gets there, he finds a couple named Aquila and Priscilla, and the Bible says that he abode with them many days because they were of the same profession, tent makers. So how did Paul often support himself? Well, he built tents. He worked with his hands, he labored with his hands, and he provided for his own necessities, and, now catch this, not only for his, but those that were with him. You think about Timothy and Silas and Titus and Silvanus and others, Epaphroditus and others that traveled with him from time to time, Barnabas. You know who helped support them? The Apostle Paul. How? He worked with his hands. Now, that doesn't mean that's the only way a preacher can be supported. Lest I give the wrong impression, Paul actually would tell the church at Corinth later that he had done them wrong, because he didn't take their financial support because he had supported himself. That they should have supported him and he should have had them support him. And so there's this dual mindset about a support. But listen, there's a lot of places in the world where the Lord's church cannot support a preacher. I mean, for example, in the country of Tanzania, Eastern Africa. We've done a lot of work in Tanzania over the years. And there, the average giving on a Sunday at a local church is about $1. Not per person, for the whole congregation. You going to support a preacher on $1 a week? How's he going to feed his family? You're going to have to learn to grow it. Now listen, we're not trying to make preachers rich. I want every preacher to be rich. I'd love for preachers to be rich. I know that there are some in our brotherhood that have the opinion that preachers are supposed to be humble and broke. That's shameful. But there is also necessity. And so what we try to do is, if we really want the gospel to go into the whole world, we've got to equip preachers wherever they are with the ability to preach and to keep preaching. I want you to think about Romans chapter 10. In Romans chapter 10, Paul would write this great discourse about how beautiful are the feet of those that are going to spread the gospel of glad tidings. And how shall they be sent? How shall they go except they be sent? Right? There is the necessity to be sent, but there's also the necessity to be taken care of while you're there. And we need to come to grips with a truth here in America. A truth that's probably uncomfortable and is going to make you squirm a little bit for a second. Now, I want you to bear with me for this. Do you know what the average loss of churches of Christ is in America per year on average right now? You know how many churches of Christ are closing their doors per year in America right now? Now, this is going back all the way to 1990. This is from the Pew Research Center. 333 churches per year in the United States closing their doors. I'm going to ask you a question now that's hopefully settled into your brain. What happens to those churches or to those mission works that they support when those churches close? I can tell you personally, in the last 2 months, we've had 6 congregations that support our mission work send me letters saying, we can no longer support your work, we've closed our doors. You know how bad that hurts us in our ability to go and do the work God's given us to do? Now, I want you to think about that across the brotherhood, and the church is declining very quickly in number. What's going to happen to those mission works overseas eventually? I can tell you what's going to happen to them. They're going to shut their doors. And so, brethren, it is imperative on multiple levels for us to equip the mission field with the ability to sustain itself. We're not talking about cake sales here. We're not talking about carnivals at churches. We're talking about a preacher having the ability to grow his own food so he can feed his own family. That's what we're talking about. And I want you to think about the 3 works of the Lord's church. What are the three? Y'all know the three works of the Lord's church, right? Evangelism, edification, and benevolence. We've been having this beat into our heads since we were in elementary school, right? We know the 5 steps of salvation. We know the 3 works of the church. Should be basic to us. I want you to think about how this could benefit all 3 of those works for a minute. Think about benevolence. What if you equip a congregation with the ability to grow food in a very impoverished country, and say they take some land that maybe one of the members owns, or maybe the church is sitting on, that instead of it being asphalt or instead of it being a dirt lot, what if they grew a garden together? And now they take that food that they've grown and they go down and they find the poorest family in town, in their village, living in a mud hut, and they walk up and they knock on the door. Now I'm going to present you with 2 scenarios. I'm going to walk up to your door and I'm going to knock on it, and I'm empty-handed. Would you like to know about Jesus? Maybe. Now, I'm going to walk back up to this hut, and I'm going to knock on the door. And now remember, I'm not making fun of you. You don't look like you're starving, okay? Me neither. Now, we walk up, and I got a basket full of food. And you got hungry kids. And I say, I'm a member of the Church of Christ here in Bagamoyo, Tanzania. And the Lord loves you, and we love you. And we want you to have food for your family. And we've grown this all together as a community. Which one do you think is going to open that door for evangelism better? I mean, it should be basic, right? This should be something we all get. Which one's going to open the door, though? The second one. So we teach them, if you want to do evangelism effectively, you remember the old adage? I mean, I'm sure you've heard it. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. This is one of the best tools that we have as far as evangelism. In Africa, especially like countries like Uganda, where we have a preaching school I'll tell you about in a minute, we raise a tree there called the moringa tree. Anybody ever heard of the moringa? No, my people, don't raise your hands. Helen has. Of course you have. The moringa tree. Okay. The moringa tree is the most nutritious plant on earth. If you take a map of the world and you overlay, okay, where the most impoverished countries are, we call them developing or third world countries, and then you overlay where the moringa tree grows, it's identical. It's as if God planted it there and said, here. It has every amino acid that our bodies need. Every one of them. Essential vitamins, minerals. It has 21 times the protein of yogurt. In its leaves. Has 7 times the vitamin A of a carrot. It has 10 times the calcium of milk. So we grow it. We've got 3,000 moringa trees at our preaching school in Uganda. We dry the seeds, we crush them, we make them into a powder, and we put in these little clear bags, and we go into a village that's never had the gospel, and we have Bible tracts within those bags, and we walk up to women in particular, mothers in particular, and we tell them about Jesus. And we say, listen, this can change your life, but we have something that's way more powerful than that called the gospel. See, if you're a woman in Africa and you're trying to nurse a child, you cannot produce enough milk, most likely, for your child. Most women in Africa cannot because of malnutrition. The moringa powder, it takes 6 tablespoons of moringa powder per day, can cure the malnutrition for a woman to where she can actually nurse her child. If you're a mother and now you can nurse your child because somebody has reached out to you in love and care, is that going to change the way you think about that person? Absolutely. And so God has given us tools. We live in a country where we're kind of benign. You know what I mean by that? Benign? We're kind of clean freaks, and we do everything by checkbook and credit cards, and we don't deal much in the old regular world that this world has existed within for eons of time. We've kind of moved out of that. And I think it has spaced us out somewhat from reality. Somebody once said, I don't think this is what the church ought to be doing. That's fine. You don't have to get involved with us. But brethren, every time you hear Jesus talk in your New Testament, he would start out with things like this. Behold, the sower went forth to sow seed. And he sowed some seed on, and he goes and gives 4 types of ground. You know who related to that? Every person in the audience. You know why? Because every one of them had to eat. Every one of them understood farming and agriculture. John chapter 15, when Jesus teaches about the vine and the husbandman, every one of them got it. When he would teach about the seed and the mustard tree and the kingdom being like that, you know who got it? All the people. Why? Because that was something that was elementary to them and something that was very basic to them. And I think we need to re-look at how we do mission work to get back to that kind of concept. We try to westernize the mission field, which is a disaster. I've tried it. It doesn't work. How did Jesus meet people? I want you to think about this for a second. How did he meet them? Did he meet them on his level or on their level? That woman that was at the well, did he meet her on a different plane altogether, or did he find her where she was going to be at? He waited for her. Remember, he sent his disciples on. He said, you guys go on into town. I've got to do something here. And here comes this woman, and she's got a life that's a mess, and it's a train wreck. And what does he do? He made it simple. He met her where she was at. That's what we need to do in the mission field. So that's kind of the mindset that we're coming at with our mission work. So in Tanzania, the next year, after 2010, I had the opportunity, I was invited to go teach at a preaching school there to a bunch of preaching school students. I had the opportunity to teach them about raising rabbits, raising chickens, raising gardens, and raising tilapia, and making their own fish ponds to raise them in. And so, you guys know why we raise rabbits? See all them rabbits? Rabbits are the superfood of the third world. We have statements about rabbits, right? Like we use them as an analogy and an illustration. You know, they breed like rabbits. Like it's a thing, right? It's a thing. And rabbits have almost zero cholesterol, but their gestation period is 30 days. So you can breed a rabbit, 30 days later, you got little rabbits. And 6 weeks later, you've got dinner. Now, this dinner can eat the scraps from your yard and turn it into dinner. And out the back end of dinner comes pelletized fertilizer that's perfectly formulated for your garden. And they make zero noise. You ever heard a rabbit talk besides Bugs Bunny? I mean, you don't hear rabbits talk. They don't make noise. They're simple. You could put them in a cage about yay big. So those cages behind them, those are rabbit cages. Amazing animals. So we teach them so I went and taught this course on how to raise rabbits. One of the students, the gentleman in the pink shirt there, went back to his village. He decided he didn't want to raise rabbits. That's fine. Matter of fact, the whole time he was in my course for 2.5 weeks, he argued with me. His name was Frank Mwaka Bwanga. Okay? And I get this email from Frank the day after I leave that says, I think pretty much he told me I was an idiot. Okay, fair enough. 2 months later, I get an email from Frank. I'm not such an idiot anymore. So we teach a course called scrounging. Y'all know what scrounging is? Y'all, come on, y'all. Somebody here knows what scrounging. John, you know what scrounging is? Scrounging? Yeah, you're going around getting whatever you need. Okay, now in Africa, you ain't got money. So how are you going to build a chicken coop? Scrounging. So what he had done, so I taught him how to build a big chicken coop for raising meat birds. Okay? He tore down 2 buildings for a guy. The guy paid him to tear down the building. He got all the pieces of the building, went back and built him a chicken coop. The next month, I get an email from him, and he sends me this picture of this chicken coop. And it's full of chickens. It says, everything's going great. Wanted to know some chicken feed formulations and some things, so I sent it to him. The next month, I get another picture, and it's all these meat birds getting ready to go in the freezer. The next month, he sends me an email, and he says, man, this has changed my life. I'm completely self-supported, and I'm helping another preacher here do the same thing. Brethren, what if we can teach them to preach and keep them preaching? What good is it to train someone to preach if we can't keep them in the field preaching? See, that's a waste of our time. We've got to be practical. We've got to be useful. We got to help our brethren in meaningful ways. I like to say it this way. I don't want to give somebody a handout. I want to give them a hand up. You remember the old proverb, right? You give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. But you teach him to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime. That's what we're trying to do. So we started in 2010. Now, I want you to notice this gentleman in the light blue shirt. You see me come down to the front row, the second guy over, light blue shirt holding the rabbit with the gray ears there. His name is Maurice Gasper. You're going to see his picture a lot. Remember that face. So let me tell you a little bit about where we work. We work in Nepal. We work in Tanzania. Pretty much if you can go along the eastern coast of Africa, we do a lot of work there. We have a preaching school in Uganda. We have one in Kenya. We have works going on in Mexico, Panama, and we're trying to expand into South America right now. We've done work in Malawi. We've done work in Ghana, Togo, all over Africa especially. I've done work in Thailand and Myanmar, and a lot of opportunity, Bangladesh. So one of our big goals is we want to train preachers to preach. Now, we're going to do it with the same mindset that I've been talking to you about. So what we have is what we call bush schools. We don't build fancy preaching schools. We build bush preaching schools. And we don't call them really preaching schools. We call them Bible and preacher training schools. Because you're going to notice that there are some women here in the picture. We're not training women to preach, so don't come to me afterward and say, you training women to preach? We're not training them to preach in a local congregation. We're training them to be Bible students. If a woman wants to come to one of our Bible training centers, we want them to be there. I'm going to tell you why. The girl on our far left there, her name's Jennifer. She was recently hired at a orphanage that's just right down the road from where our preaching school is in Tanzania. And her job with all those orphans, 40 orphans at this orphanage, is teaching them every day. So she is a school teacher. You know what she's using as her curriculum? The Bible. What better way could we raise up the next generation of Christians than by doing that right there? So you see the buildings? Those are the houses for the students at the Talawanda School of Preaching in Tanzania. We don't build fancy dorms. We build huts. We want to make it like where they came from. And we're not a popular preaching school. I'll tell you that. The people aren't just signing up to come to our preaching school. They have to work. Every student at our preaching school has to work every day 1 hour on the school farm. We have a school farm. Every student has to work 1 hour every day. Anybody want to sign up yet? You got to live in a hut. You got to grow your own food. You're not getting paid to go there, by the way. Most preaching schools around the world give money to their students to come there. We don't give stipends. It's hard. There's pythons. There's cobras. There's scorpions the size of my hand. Anybody want to go yet? Nobody? But do you know why we do it this way? We're not trying to Americanize them or Westernize them. We want to make it just like where they're going to go back to, because we want them to go back to their village. We need them to go back to their village and preach. So we have Bible and preacher training schools. The first one we built was at the Rwenzori School of Preaching. This is in southwest Uganda, and it's right on the border of the DR Congo, just north of Rwanda, and it's a very dry, desolate area there. We have 20 students there. We grow a lot of food there. Most of the food that they eat is grown by the school. We grow extra of our crops that we can take and barter with. So we aren't going to grow sugarcane, for example, and process sugarcane, make sugar out of it. We're not going to grow wheat and make flour out of it because we just don't have the facilities or the land to do that. So we'll grow rice or we'll grow beans, and then we'll take it to the market and we'll trade it for the things we need, which enables us to be mostly self-sufficient. Now, our budget, you'll notice I've got it marked out and it's increased. You know how we've suffered? Anybody else suffer inflation besides me? It's nothing here. You ought to go to third world countries right now. I mean, it's really bad. In Tanzania, it's 100% right now is inflation rate. And so Uganda's pretty close. It's not quite as much. So it's costing us a little more to operate. That mainly covers teacher salaries. The government has required us to pay our teachers a certain salary every year. and so it's not something we can change. So the majority of our budget goes to salaries and electricity and things like that. Now, we do have solar for electricity, but we've recently hooked up to the local electric grid. We have a lot more students than we've had before. We usually had about 10 to 15 students, and we're up to 20, and there's a lot more demand, so we've added some local electricity. We have another school in Talawanda, Tanzania. It's called the Talawanda School of Preaching. And again, we dug a well there. We went in, we hired a company to come in and dig us a well. They told us that we'd hit water at about 200 feet, and the water tables were good, did all the surveys. We dug to 600 feet and got zero water. It was really disappointing. Dropped $10,000 on this water well that was dry hole. Man, I was sad. And then a brother came to me and said, we're going to fix that. I said, well, how are you going to fix that? And they came in and they brought in giant water tanks, and then they built a bunch of roofs across our property that catch water when it does rain. And all those roofs catch all that water, harvest it, bring it into the water tanks, and then we have a pump that's solar powered that pumps out of the water tanks, pumps to our school. Works. Overcome, right? It's a great school. This is probably my favorite school at this point, just because of the amount of work they're doing. Every month right now, I should have changed this. I sent money yesterday for the school. I sent $16.55 yesterday to the school. We have challenged each of our schools to start cutting away one budget item per month. Figure out a way to cut one budget item per month. And so the way they're doing that, for instance, the school here in Talawanda is raising chickens. And what they're doing is they've got a bunch of laying hens, and they're taking those eggs and they're taking them to the market in town and selling the eggs, and then they're using the money from those eggs to pay for their other needs so that they're becoming more self-sustaining, which is an awesome, awesome thing. And then we have the School of Church Growth. Now, we do the School of Church Growth all over the world. We started this in Nepal this year. I'm going to explain this because this is a game changer for the mission field, in my opinion. Most of the churches around the world do not have elders, do not have organized leadership the way the Bible describes. And so we've really been trying to figure out, how do we deal with this? And we didn't even deal with it here in America. But how do we deal with this in the third world country? How do we get churches to start developing and maturing to the point where they can have their own elders and deacons and grow into congregations that are self-sustaining, autonomous, strong churches that are taking on the mission field for themselves? It should not always be that America does the mission work, right? That should be something that they take a hold of for themselves. And there's some that are doing it already, but we're trying to help with that. And so let me explain what the School of Church Growth is real quick. It's a 12-month program. In Nepal, we've got 100 congregations signed up for this right now, going through it. And each month has a different course. So, for instance, January, first month, it's going to be, what is the church? What is the church? What am I a member of? Why am I a member of it? Why is it the Lord's church? And we go through all the prophecies in the Old Testament about the kingdom. We get to the New Testament, how Christ set up his kingdom. In Acts chapter 2, how the fulfillment of the day of Pentecost there, and how that church grew, and in the early church it grew. That's month 1. Month 2 is, what is the work of the church? How do we do evangelism, edification, benevolence? What is our responsibility? Are we a social club? Is that what we are? Somewhere we just go to, because we use these terms, right? We go to church, right? Like we're going to some kind of social event. Is that what it is? What is our work? So we spend a whole month talking about that. Month 3, how do we organize properly with elders? So we spend a whole month talking about elders. Now let me give you a picture of what this curriculum looks like. Every month you're going to be given a packet, and it's going to have information for what you're to do every day as a member. Now, every man, woman, and child in the congregation goes through this school. And there's Bible verses every day for every person to memorize. There's Bible reading every day in this packet for them to read through. There is teaching curriculum for them to read through, and then the preacher gets up and preaches on each of these subjects every Sunday. Okay, so the whole church is going through this together. Month 4, deacons. Month 5, preachers. How do we develop preachers in a place where we can't pay for a preacher? How do we do that? Well, it's pretty simple. We've complicated preaching, y'all. You know what preaching is? It's not being eloquent up here and giving this great discourse. Somebody goes, you had a great talk today. It was a great talk. That's not preaching, y'all. What did Paul say to Timothy? Preach what? The word. Did you know that most of the time in the first century, their preaching was not a sermon like we would consider today? It was not 3 points, introduction and conclusion. You know what it was? Get up and read a letter from Paul. Maybe you got in the book of Galatians, the letter from Galatia, and they would just get up and read it. That was the sermon. Let me ask you, what could you add to that would actually improve upon it? People all the time say, well, I could never preach. Why? You can't read? That's all preaching really should be, reading God's word. It should be expounding upon God's word in such a way that people can understand it. So, you're in Timbuktu, Africa. You can't afford a preacher, and you're a new congregation. You have nobody to preach to you. What do? I don't want to do all the preaching. Okay, fine. So, Dylan, Sunday, you're preaching. You're preaching the next. You're preaching the next. And you're preaching the next. And you're looking terrified right now. What do I do? Can you get up and read? You can read, right? Yeah. You read? Yeah. Done. We're not going to complicate this thing. Get up and read God's word. Get up and read God's word. Are you going to get false teaching when you read God's word? Ever? No. You're never going to. See, we can make this as hard as we want or as simple as we want and still do what God asked us to do and still grow. So we train them how to do this. They only have one service on a Sunday. Most places around the world only have one service on Sunday. You only got to present one sermon that way all month. You got one, Dylan. You've got one. You got one. You got one. That's not too hard, right? You can spend time reading and preparing to do that, and you can do that. So we've made it complicated. They think that they've got to be like us and have church buildings like us and have preachers the way that we have preachers and do it when it's not that complicated. Month 6. So now you got a church, and you've taught them what they're to do, and they've got elders and deacons and preachers and men at least serving in that role, and you got a bunch of people together. What happens when you get a bunch of people together? People start to disagree. I got my opinion, and you're welcome to yours if you want to be wrong. Right? That's how we feel about our opinions and yours. So eventually, guess what's going to happen? Division. How do we deal with it? A whole month we're going to spend on dealing with division. Month 7, false teachers. What does Paul tell the church at Ephesus, the elders? When I leave, you better beware, because there's going to be grievous wolves enter even in among yourselves, talking to even the elders. How do we prepare for false teaching? How do I identify false teaching? How do I know when it's here? You read 1 Peter. You know what the whole book of 1 Peter is about? False teachers. So you can get ready for it. You go to month 8. Now we're going to start talking about how to build godly families. What's the backbone of every church? Having godly homes. How do we do that? So we're going to spend a whole month talking about these kind of things. We're going to talk about sacrificial giving. Have a whole month on sacrificial giving. We're going to have a whole month on now how do I replicate this into the next village. See, we don't want the Lord's church just to stay in Vance, Alabama. You know what your goal should be? We don't ever talk about this in the Lord's church. This is why the church is not growing, brethren. We're not talking about what's a town? Somebody tell me a town or a community around here that does not have a Church of Christ. Come on, somebody, quick. Okay, what is it? Brookwood, no church. What's our plan? Yeah, what's our plan? How are we going to get a church in Brookwood? See, that should be our goal. Told you I was going to make you uncomfortable. Y'all are looking around like, ooh. How did it happen?
There was a group of 4 or 5 with all traveling to other churches and further distance. A group of 4 or 5 men got together and started talking about it. And then that's where the ideal grew. And then it's come down to this.
We used to do purposeful church splits. We call them church plants. But what they were was a church split, where we would take part of this group from here, and we would go to Brookwood. We'd rent a building. We'd rent a storefront. We'd rent a gymnasium. I've heard of them renting the Elks Lodge and bars before just to have a place to worship and get it started and get it going. The idea of replication needs to be something that's in the forefront. How are we going to plant the next congregation in the next village? You think about Acts chapter 8, what happened with the early church? There was persecution, and what did they do? The disciples went everywhere, right? So we need to get in our minds this idea of replication. So that's the last month. How do I now take what I've learned, mature to a point? I want to mature to a point where now we can look at the next village and go, let's do this there. Okay? So that's what we have to do here, and we need to do it overseas. Okay? So we do that. We do a lot of sustainability training. We'll go and do a lot of seminars. And the agriculture we teach is not John Deere Tractor Supply agriculture. I love John Deere. I love Tractor Supply. I love the local co-op. I love being able to go buy anything I want at a moment's notice. I love Amazon farming. You know, you can get on the Amazon and buy all the seed you want. You can buy all the tools you want. They don't have that there. So how are you going to teach somebody to row crop? You know, row cropping isn't done all over the world. I'm going to show you how they plant corn. They'll get a stick and they'll walk over here and they'll poke a hole in the ground and take some seed. I know that wasn't my bell. And throw it in the ground and they'll step on it. And he'll walk over here, poke a hole in the ground, throw some seed in it, step on it, walk over here, poke a hole in the ground. Helen, have you seen them do that in India? Yeah. Yeah, a little sprout, yeah. But there's no rows most places. So we teach them how to row crop. Just by row cropping, we can increase about 100-fold what they grow on a piece of property. If you could increase by 100-fold what you grow, would you want to do that? And here's how important this is. In America, we spend 10% of our budget on food. In a third world country, they spend 90% of their budget on food. If you could get rid of 90% of your budget by growing a garden, would you? It would make a bigger difference, right? Like, we almost waste money growing a garden in America. But there, it's a game changer. Okay, so we teach a lot of things like just basic row cropping. Teach them how to do sustainable agriculture with things like biochar to improve their soil fertility and their moisture retention and their bioavailability of soil nutrition. We do, well, that's not how that's supposed to look. We teach a lot of regenerative agriculture. We teach them how to grow things that are going to aid them in being self-sustaining. My time is just about up, so let me finish with this. Since we started, we've planted over 200 congregations at the Manna Project. We have had over 6,000 baptisms. We've trained over 225 gospel preachers. And then let me get to the part. This is the part I don't like, y'all, so just bear with me if I stumble through this part. What do we need? We need help to do it. We need funds. Right now, compared to 5 years ago, pre-COVID, it costs us double to go on a trip, to go overseas and work. And yet our budget has not gone up at all. And so we need funds. We're trying to raise funds desperately so we can help with travel expenses. I'm not looking for personal support. That's not what I'm asking for. We're talking about operational funding. We need to do some school upgrades at our preaching schools, and we've got opportunities to go and add new preaching schools, new training facilities. We just need the funds to do it. The governments where we're working are requiring us to increase our teacher salaries. So we need to be able to do that. We need training materials. We need to be able to print materials and get it put out there. We're trying to do a whole video series on everything we do, and we're trying to get it put into 14 different languages right now. That is our goal. That takes money. And we certainly need prayers for our safety. Some of you may be saying, well, okay, how can I help? How can I get involved? I want you to think about this just real quick. Do you know the average American right now spends, add a zero to each of those, somehow that got messed up there. It's supposed to be 120, 200, and 200. The average American spends $200 a month on what I call foofy coffee. Y'all know what foofy coffee is? Yeah, Starbucks-y stuff, with all the foofy stuff in it. $200 a month is the average spending in America right now on foofy coffee. John, is that you? You buying the foofy coffee? Oh, you look like a foofy coffee drinker. Oh, he pointed. I'm sorry. Yeah. Like your husband's heart, right? Average American spends $200 a month. So here's what I'm asking. We spend $200 a month on our pets, and we spend $120 on average in America on sodas. What if we could, as a brotherhood, get behind doing mission work in this way, and individually as families get involved and help? We've started an initiative, we're calling it the 1,000 for the Thousands. We're trying to get 1,000 supporters, individual supporters, to help us with $50 a month. $50 a month. Now, if you do the math real quick, you take 1,000 supporters at $50 a month, that adds up really, really, really fast. You think about the amount of work we could do with a budget like, you know what, I need to go to Zimbabwe next month. We don't have the funds right now. So guess who's not going to Zimbabwe right now? This guy. But if we had a fund built up where we could just go and work, you know how awesome that would be? Where we could build more preaching schools, more training centers, and we just had the funds. I didn't have to go around and ask everybody, could you guys help us build a preaching training school? That's our goal. We actually want to invest. We want to get to the point with our Manna Project fund where we actually have an endowment fund that puts us into perpetuity, going and thinking about long into the future. So if the church is declining by 333 congregations per year, eventually the churches are not going to be here to support us if we keep on the trend we're in. What's going to keep the mission work going? Well, we're going to have to be smart. We're going to have to start investing and thinking about the future. And so we want to do that. If you want to help us, online you can support the Manna Project through our webpage. It's very secure. You can just screenshot that or click on it on your camera and it'll take you to our website. It'll allow you to set up a monthly donation. And if you want to do 50, 25, if you want to do 5,000 a month, we'll take it. If you got a whole bunch of money sitting in a bank account you don't know what to do with, let us help you. Like I said, this part I hate doing, but we need funds to do the work we're going to do. We want to bring on more workers to go. We got more workers that want to come and work with us. We just don't have the funding to bring them on. So we need help. Anybody have any questions? Nobody? All right. Thank you so much for letting me come and talk to you about our work. Please pray for us. Let me ask you, please pray for us that God will open up more opportunities for us. I appreciate y'all.